So the topic today is how to build an audience, kind of a broad topic and a little ambitious. And I don't think that in an hour we're going to, it's not going to be prescriptive as far as how to go to 0 to a million. But why should we care about these guys? And we'll see after this panel if we do. But the reason is that millions and millions of people do within their respective areas of expertise. They each have the largest single audience of any person, and in a lot of cases much bigger than media companies and even large multi-billion-dollar brands. I mean, for instance, we had Toyota and Gatorade on stage earlier, and each one of these guys in their own social followings has larger audiences than those two brands. So that's right there. That gives me pause, and it's why I think part of this is really exciting for me to bring sort of snow sports to these guys and be able to get that going back and forth. A lot of people in here are building audiences, whether that's within magazines or filmmakers, and even now brands are really doing that. So I think that we can hopefully learn something from these gentlemen, and beyond their dashing good looks, I think they have a lot to tell. So I'm going to just very quickly run through who they are. We have Robert Scoble. Robert Scoble is a tech evangelist, an author, and if you're starting a company in Silicon Valley or actually anywhere in the world, you probably want to get in touch with Robert. He told me yesterday he was on the phone with a 16-year-old kid from India who tracked him down and said, I need your advice. We have Gary Arndt, who his site and blog, Everything Everywhere, is the largest independent travel blog, and he has a massive audience. He also travels full-time. A lot of people in this room travel a lot. No one travels as much as this guy. We have Alex Hillinger. His agency is Good Chemistry. Alex is a little different on this panel in that he is not in the same category as these three guys, but he is a brilliant strategist who has actually worked with all three of them in advising how to either use their audience in their business or how to grow it, how to engage further.
Is that what we call smoking dope in the top?
Yeah.
Not supposed to talk about that.
This is being recorded.
Different guy.
Yeah. But Alex is going to help me referee Robert and the rest of the group here. And it's great to have him here. And of course, as Derek mentioned, I've worked with Chase actually for the better part of 15 years. In my work with Free Skier, I actually was his editor to start, and then eventually became his employee somehow. So I don't know how that all happened, but I've worked with him, and in addition to being a very world-famous photographer and a disruptive force in creativity, he's also an incredibly gifted moderator, if anyone was here earlier. So I'm just trying to live up to it.
I got a second career right on the other
side. Yeah, you make hundreds. So I think we're going to try to dive right in, and the idea is for all of you to be able to walk with some real nuggets, and we'll try not to get it, to have it sort of disintegrate into too ooey gooey, because when we start to talk about this stuff, it can sort of get ethereal. But let's start with how you guys built your audience, and if you can give us sort of the elevator pitch on how you went from being, a guy who knew a lot about technology to having the single biggest audience of anybody in technology.
I was always interested in photography and journalism. I met Steve Wozniak in college and built a friendship and interviewed him for a school paper, and that just led into a path that just keeps getting crazier and crazier. It's like a doubling penny. Back then there was probably only 15 people that read that article in the school paper, and now it's more important. But that was the journey. My passion has always been growing up in Silicon Valley and finding the next new thing and studying how these new things get built. So I worked at a computer programming magazine after college. I went to journalism school. Planned conferences for programmers that got me in touch with a lot of people in the industry, and I got to see the innards of the industry. Started blogging in 2000, which was early, and blogging was a disruptive technology and just kept getting more and more important as Google got more and more important. And that got me into working at Microsoft and Fast Company magazine, and now at Rackspace. And now at Rackspace, I always play with journalism and marketing. So the earlier panels were very interesting to me. These are really gods in my eyes of the marketing world. And I'm unusual in that aspect, that I switched from marketing to journalism and content development. And I understand a little bit of both worlds.
Thanks. Gary?
March of 2007, I sold my home and decided I was going to travel around the world for a year. And 5.5 years later, I'm still doing it. When I began, I basically started a small blog, and basically for friends and family, and I just sort of documented my travels, took photos. And I was about 9 months into my trip. I was in Hong Kong, and I kind of had this come to Jesus moment where I was like, I am wasting my time, because I could tell you the names of everyone reading my website. And I realized either this is a waste of my time and I should stop doing this and I'll just travel and forget the blog, or I should take this seriously. And I decided to take it seriously. And there was no blueprint for what I was doing because no one else had done it before. I'm not a journalist. I had no background in writing or photography. And I just sort of set out there. And over time, I think the longer I've traveled, people find what I can do compelling. Not everyone necessarily wants to do it, but like you said, is like, I can live vicariously through you. That, you know, people have work and family obligations and other things, but something deep inside people, it's like, oh, I wish I could do that. I wish I could drop everything and just go around the world. And I think that's been probably the biggest reason I've developed the audience I've had.
Excellent. So both starting in really what you wanted to do with your time and your passion sort of started the impetus for.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of luck along the way. In 2010, Time Magazine came out their list of the top 25 blogs, and I was on it. And then that opened up a whole bunch of new doors, and more people discovered me, and it's kind of just been a word of mouth type thing. And even though I've been on CNN and MSNBC and all these major media outlets, they don't really do a lot for me in terms of building traffic. It's been the biggest boost in traffic in my audience I ever got was being on Tim Ferriss's blog. By far, that was the biggest one. A huge jump in subscribers. And it's been other individuals mentioning me, referring me, whether they're influential or not. It could be just someone telling their friend, has been where most of my audience growth has occurred.
That's interesting. We'll come back to that, but it's interesting that it was a print magazine that sort of put you on the map, and then it's been another blog.
I never actually put it in print. It was only online.
Only online?
Yeah. I don't care about print. You can't click on it.
I worked at Fast Company magazine for a year, and my hits did not go up there in that year. They've gone up more in the past year since I put so much energy into Facebook and Google+. But yeah, I agree with you on that.
Yeah, so I think I have about 700 Twitter followers, so I'm orders of magnitude less audience than these guys, but these guys are heroes to me because of what they do, and I spend a lot of time engaging myself in social media, really understanding sort of what are the dynamics behind building community, and then try to apply that basically to help people who do have public personas, who do have a business model that supports growing a really robust and large and engaged audience, and understanding the mechanisms behind that growth. So for me, it's neither important nor anything that I really want to be sort of out in the public eye. I'm much more comfortable
behind the scenes guy. Yeah. Faceless man.
Pay no attention.
Yeah. Chase?
I think the start of an audience came from basically just wanting to do what it is that I wanted to do with my life. Had to reconcile something early on, which was I was an artist trapped in a jock's body. I went to college on a soccer scholarship, and
Yeah, that's my problem.
as a young man, that no longer applies. But and when I grew up, those two groups were unreconcilable. You're either an artist or a jock, and it was really through the skate, punk, surf ethos that I realized that you could be a great athlete and an artist. And so I had the balls to sort of do what it is that I wanted to do, and there were no options for me because I didn't want to go. I had quit a PhD program in the philosophy of art, and so I had to build it from the ground up, and I couldn't get anyone to help me. There was the creative profession, photography, filmmaking, those are very closed because they're historically been secrets that were preserved on how you do X and Y. And I found that incredibly frustrating. So I went in and took my own hacks and taught myself how to do what it is that I went on to do for a career. And I said if I was ever in a position to change that, I would. And when the social tools started becoming available, blogging, Facebook, Twitter, etc., I finally had an opportunity to talk to more than a group of 100 at a time and talk at scale. And so the way I cultivated an audience was never for the mechanism of cultivating an audience. I think that's a really important distinction to make. I wanted to live the life that I wanted to live, and in the process, I figured I could, the sawdust that I was making, the stuff, that behind the scenes stuff, I could share that with the world through these scalable methods. And it was 10 years before it was cool to do that shit, so I was ridiculed. My industry thought that I was taking food off their table and giving it to an 18-year-old with a camera. And the irony is those same jackasses that were ridiculing me were calling me for a job like 5 years later. So in short, it was by giving information away and expecting nothing in return. And that, there is monetization, and monetization was a heavy concept in the last panel. And I think it will come up here, but it initially starts by creating value for someone to pay attention to what it is that you're doing.
Yeah, I actually dislike the title of this whole panel. I think it's bullshit.
Me too.
Me too. I named it.
And here's why I think it's bullshit. If somebody comes up to me and goes, "Oh, you have XYZ Twitter followers. How do I do that?" My brain shuts off, and I start thinking about drinking with Chase later tonight, right?
But if somebody comes up to me and says, because the social aspect of it, I mean, this goes much. Building an audience is not just having a Facebook page, right? And for brands and media companies, and this is important stuff that you guys can sort of lend some expertise to. But without those social vehicles, you just said it, Chase, right? I mean, that was the switch. In a lot of ways, all of you were born of your passion for a subject and your expertise in that subject. But it was really the advent of social vehicles that made you be able to create the audience that you do. Now, at the same time, all of you will say, "I hate Facebook, I hate Twitter." Like those things they're just tools in your toolbox, essentially. But I think a lot of people probably are curious how you use those tools. And that's a real tactic that I think we could pull away from this. And then we can get, like I said, we can get into like why you actually, it's much deeper philosophically than just knowing how to use Facebook.
Yeah. I want to touch on one thing though before we go on to that, because I think that the common sort of thread between Robert and Gary and Chase is that each of them made a very conscious decision to step out from what was happening as the sort of standard narrative in their respective industry. Chase decided to give it all away and talk about what professional photographers actually do when that was absolutely what you don't do. Robert, crazy as it is, stood up against Microsoft and started blogging about
that
Microsoft
was after,
from inside.
yeah, but that was after I discovered that blogging had power. And blogging, the impulse to blog was just to share with my friends what was going on behind the scenes at a conference, right? And that grew really quickly into like 3,000 people, because like Dave Weiner, linked to one of my posts, and 3,000 people showed up, and I was like, whoa, there's a lot of people reading these things, and now it's like 3,000 people is a little hit on something, but back then it was a big deal to have 3,000 people reading what you wrote, and so that encouraged me to just keep doing it and finding new things to talk about in the tech industry and start feeding that beast. And
but I think that you had a desire to tell the stories that weren't being told. And at the time that you did that was not what...
And I had access, because I was planning conferences, I had access to the world's best programmers and best personalities behind, and so I was sitting in the green room talking with people about their companies they were building.
So at the heart of it, there's valuable content. Yeah. I mean, and all the content creators in this room, the same thing, access to the skiers and snowboarders and the locations. All of you were starting with that in one way or another, but you were also coming with a message that was a bit disruptive. I think that's what you're saying.
Fundamental zig when everybody else was zagging.
Right. Everyone's going one direction, but you did use social tools to do that. Point back.
To the where I was starting. Don't come up to me and ask me how do I get 200,000 Twitter followers, but do come up to me and say, I have a story to tell, and it's not getting through this noise. Mm-hmm.
So this is
my Twitter account.
This is what it looks like.
A new tweet every half a second. There's a lot of noise here, and how do you punch through that noise? How do you get your story told, and how do you get people to engage with it and retweet it, and then we can have an interesting conversation, because I'll go, first thing I'll ask you is, what's your Facebook page? What's your Twitter account? What's your YouTube account? What's your website? And I'll just start looking at how good are you at telling that story. And I'll give, we'll sit down in the top of Aspen and we'll start talking to you about your story and how to improve it and how to maybe, who you should talk to punch that story through to the audience. That's a more fun and creative thing to do than just how do you build 200,000
So none of you are experts in, or present yourselves certainly as experts in social media. No interest in that whatsoever. No. You're fundamentally the same way the filmmakers and the media folks in this room, the brand, you're telling stories in one way or another. So what do you say to that? Part of my brand
is that I am usually early. I was the 79th user on Instagram. I was very early on Twitter. I was their #1 user for the first 2 years of their existence. So I have built a brand. I was the first person to talk about Flipboard, for instance. So I have built a brand that I'm early with these new technologies, these new media technologies, and I understand them. And I talk to Mark Zuckerberg and understand where Facebook's going. Zuck, and so I do build a brand around a little bit around that. But I'm bored with the conversation when people come up to me and go, how do I get 200,000 Twitter followers? I'm much more interested in how do I, tell a story? How do I, get to know Chase and understand how he tells stories? That's more fun.
The problem that I have with the title is I think it's different than yours too, because from the perspective, like, if it's you looking at your audience, I think that's the fundamental mistake first and foremost, because all of us have had the experience of sort of being on the receiving end of that. Do you want to be treated like the audience, or do you want to be treated like you're part of a community? And the big difference to me is that audience implies basically this hierarchical sort of like, here's the brand, or here's Robert, and here's, on high. Community implies, hey, it's flat, we can
So
talk
let's rename
ourselves.
the panel.
One big difference.
How to engage a community.
Yeah. Every major city I go to in the world, I have dinner or drinks with my readers. I've asked major travel writers, I say, how many of your readers do you meet? And they're like, what? That's crazy talk. You would never go to the Wall Street Journal and read an article and say, I want to contact this writer and have dinner with him. You'd never do that. There's this huge barrier. But online, there's much more familiarity. So people have no problem sending me an email saying, Gary, you're going to be in town. Let's meet up. And I do that all the time. Mm-hmm. And that sort of stuff, it's one person at a time maybe, but that's how you do it.
Right. Well, it's fundamentally from a media perspective, and I have a question for you guys about how you view yourself, right? Because my background is media, and it is more like you have an audience, and it's not necessarily, and this is changing all the time, but 10 years ago with a magazine, it certainly was you have an audience. There's not a ton of back and forth. You might get a letter in the mail occasionally. But now, you guys, it's one to many, and I think the many, they are feeling like they're having a conversation with just you. So you have 2.5 million people on Google+, Robert, and they feel like they're sitting here having a conversation with you. And that is a fundamental shift in terms of, it also applies to media, I think. So, but taking all that, the question is, how do you guys view yourselves? Are you media entities? Are you individuals? Are you journalists? Because I think that there's something in that is difficult to define.
I think the reason I survived I've worked at Rackspace for 3.5 years now. It's a big public company, and you might think that I wouldn't fit in at a place like that for very long.
Nothing.
And part of it is they've never asked me about numbers. They've never asked me about how do we get to 2 more million people? It's like, no, they tell me, here's the identity we have of the company and what we believe in, and we want you to go out and make that happen.
So are you an evangelist?
It's partly evangelist, partly journalist, because how I tell those stories. One of the stories they want you to know about Rackspace is we're helpful and nice. So I pick up the phone when somebody from India calls, and I'm helpful and nice. And
so you're an ambassador.
An ambassador is part of it. One of the stories is that they're transparent. Because if you're going to host on a company, you want to make sure that it's a company that is not a black box. Programmers hate opaque black boxes. They like open source. They like to be able to see inside your code and fix something if it's wrong or know why it's wrong.
Okay, we're into code now, so we're going to go Gary. Gary, how do you see your four-letter word?
No, let me go with this, because there's some storylines, and it all starts with a story. It's the storylines, and I fit perfectly into those storylines. Another story is we have high availability of service. That's why I put my phone number on the internet. My cell phone, that cell phone is on the internet. You can call it right now. It's still on. And that tells a story about the brand I'm representing. And that's why we get along so well, right?
So having an audience, though, you don't see yourself as a media entity. You really are an ambassador, and that does. No,
I see part of it is, I create videos and photos and hang out with Chase and try to create media. But I'm a storyteller. I'm trying to use that media to tell a story about the industry I represent, myself, and then the company I represent, right? And I think everybody in this room is trying to push themselves further, their industry further, and their company further, right? Mm-hmm. Otherwise, why are you here?
Mm-hmm. That's right. There's an intersection between the panel about branding too and this panel too, in that I think if you don't really have a firm grasp on what the underlying narrative is around your brand, you're not going to be able to connect at an emotional level with the people that you want to be a part of your community. So you really need to embrace the idea that, if it's, we have products and we want to sell them, that's not going to get you where you want to go. You really need to embrace a narrative that's a lot more sort of broad and topical, and you can own that narrative that gives you basically the right to be able to talk about your products. But you can't take the narrow view.
You never talk. Well, you talk about product once in a while. It's what you're using to travel, or your iPad, or apps that you use, right? But you're about going and seeing some place cool.
I'm not going to beat you when it comes to talking about the iPhone. You're in Silicon Valley. You get access to this stuff. I'll just refer people to you. But when it comes to going to the Isle of Nauru, or
where the hell is
that? That's kind of where my advantage lies.
Will Apple Maps actually take me there?
Probably not.
It's in San Francisco Bay.
But I view myself, there's really one story I've been telling for 5 years.
Yeah.
And that's what I've been doing. And so every day, pretty much, I get a tweet or a Facebook comment. It's like, oh, I wish I could do what you do. Can you put me in your suitcase? I get fake marriage proposals once every couple of weeks. And it's just this. So this year, in calendar year 2012, I've been to 7 continents, all 7 continents. And 1, I wanted to do that because I like traveling. But 2, I also recognize that there's a marketing component to that. And that by being able to travel that extensively and go to that many places, people find it cool.
You can go to panels like this.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, Aspen blows away Antarctica, so.
So fundamentally, again, a storyteller.
Yeah, I'm a traveler, and I'm doing, we've established that I have an athlete's body. But when you look at what I do, what does a snowboarder or a skier or a surfer do? They do at a very top level what many people do recreationally. No different than what I do. A lot of people travel, they enjoy it, and I'm just really extreme at it. That's really the only difference.
Extreme travel.
And I have an athlete's body.
Yeah.
Chase. Yeah, I think I don't have an audience. I literally don't even think about that. I think I have a life, and it's the life that I want to do. I want to do well. I want to do the things that interest me. It has to start with giving a shit about something, and primarily everyone here is in the room because they care about something. And if you want to build an audience, park that shit. You want to actually do what you're doing and tell the world about it.
Yeah.
And that goes whether you're a person or whether you're a brand or you're a product. And the way in which you tell people about it is through telling a story. And if you tell a story that's human, that's authentic, that's real, then you will build an audience, because you will create shit that is built from passion and has value when you tell other people about it. It is so simple. And watching brands try and grow audiences inorganically is like, it's so strange to me. It's so very, very strange. And they come to me and they say, how do we build an audience? And I said, well, number 1, you have to act more like a person. right? If you're just ramming shit down people's throats, that is your product. Like, what kind of a conversation is that over dinner? If you sit down across the street or across the table from Coca-Cola, say, and they're just saying, we got this new product that's called Diet Coke, we got this new product that's called Grape Coke, we got big bottles, we got small bottles, have you seen the bottles? And instead of asking questions, having a conversation, pointing to some other, like, look at that, that's a Sprite over there, that's a good-looking Sprite. Or that's still Coke product, isn't it? But you get the point. And when people, when especially brand ambassadors or folks in the audience, they want to build their audience in this sort of poorly named panel, it's like,
thanks, Jason.
Sorry, Jared. What's the most authentic way you can do that? You just have to talk about the shit you care about. And you will find other people who care about you. Those are the only people you want to be talking to anyway.
Well, so much of it, too, is actually having the discipline to listen to what people are talking about and then revelation, engage with them about those things, even if they have nothing to do with the message that you are sort of tasked with delivering.
So it's a conversation.
That's the hardest part for brands, is to empower the person who's manning the channel or the team to say, like, it's cool, you can talk to them about things that aren't sort of clearly defined.
A year ago, I had 13,000 followers on Facebook, and today I have 398,000 followers on Facebook. What changed? I started listening to other people on Facebook and liking their stuff and pushing it around and sharing it. I didn't do a lot of talking. By doing that, my inbound got better. My feed today that I see is completely different than anybody else's in this room, and it is a massively cool inbound feed because I've worked on getting people on my screen that I care about. And when I did that, I upped my game.
So what did he do? He gave stuff away, right? He gave a like away, which is sort of a thumbs up. It's a curation. It's a vote. It's an endorsement. And he expected nothing in return. But what did he get? He got a big-ass audience. That is just a rinse, wash, repeat thing. And brands typically don't want to put the energy in. It's like, oh, it's so hard. One of the brands that we like, they tell us what kind of music they listen to at work. They tell us what kind of films they saw. One of the reasons that people like Red Bull is because they put music that they like behind their videos. They empower their athletes to do some shit that we want to do. They're very human-like. And at the fundamental basis, if you can't humanize whatever it is you're doing, this whole poorly named thing isn't for you. Because you shouldn't, it's not the end in mind.
A good humanization example, a couple years ago I was in Thailand and I ordered this thing, this hot pot. So they bring out a pot of broth and you make soup. So for the hell of it, I opened up my laptop and I did a live stream of me making soup. 150 people tuned in to watch me eat soup, and then they started like, dude, put in the shrimp. Dude, put in the noodles. And there was this collaborative soup making effort of people that were in. I was just showing people making soup,
right.
But it was showing these mundane things. There's no brand that would ever do I don't think Campbell's would even do that.
But that is
part of what's
like
counterintuitive about it is that if you're taking the approach sort of like social media is about scale, I want to hit all my audience or whatever, then you're not going to do what you do, because how can you possibly on the surface level justify
First of all,
doing that?
Facebook protects users from you. If I put 10 messages into the Facebook world, you guys probably will see one of them, maybe none. And I have to be cool with that. So many brands are not. They argue with me about Facebook, saying, oh, they filter my stuff out. They keep my messages from getting to consumers, da, 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 da. I go, fuck you. You're not doing a good enough job at making everybody like your shit so that it gets pushed around the system. Red Bull doesn't talk like that. Red Bull goes, hey, let's find somebody who's jumping off a cliff in a new way and let's film a film about it and put it up. So everybody's going to click like on that and retweet it and share it and comment on it and go, holy shit, look at what that guy just did, or that girl just did. It's that's how to do this stuff and how to punch through this noise thing that's going on here, because it's noisy.
Can we look at what was it that Gary was giving when he live streamed his soup eating? Can anyone in the audience just take a stab at what he was giving?
False intimacy?
Yeah.
That's what she said.
Oh,
It was an opportunity to see into another person's life.
Yeah.
It was a connection, whether it be human or mechanical or fiber, but you gave someone a window into something they previously didn't have. The key word is give, right? And it took
give often.
Yeah, it took energy for him to open his laptop, to set up the stream, and he could have just eaten his soup. That's why this is the most beautiful example, because it's so simple. People actually gave a shit about that. And the irony is that it was probably more popular than some other things that you did that day that you thought were going to be really important, the gifts that you're giving. And ultimately, this sort of simple human giving, adding a value to someone else's day, is actually the most effective thing you can do.
One thing I've noticed is you're very transparent. Yeah. Your phone number's on the internet, which people would like cringe at. And I am...
Has it rung? It's on. It has not rung in the.
I can fix that.
And I try to be very transparent. I say where I am, where I'm staying. I do a podcast every week, and I always introduce it by saying I am in room 208 of this hotel, and never had a problem with stalkers, and people I think appreciate it.
With that athlete's body.
It's crazy. He's got bodyguards.
Well, let's bring it back just for a second, because what you're talking about, Chase, fundamentally is this idea of giving and asking nothing in return. On the previous panels, the popular notion is ROI, right? You guys all work in one way or another for brands.
Yep.
And certainly in the room, we all work for brands in one way or another, and that always comes, Scott Mellon said it, look, it's always going to come back to ROI in one way or another. So how do you answer that question, when you are engaged with the brand in one way or another? And it's not in a traditional sense of how a media company, we all understand that now, but how do you answer that question? I mean, you just sort of gave it, like, give and ask nothing. But when someone says, well, that's great, but my numbers didn't go up at all. So let's start down here and we'll come back to you.
So sometimes I work for brands, other times I work with brands, and other times still those brands work for me. And it's a different equation than has ever happened in the history of sort of the worker, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Is
that French?
Those are big words.
Yeah, it had to do with the revolution. We'll talk about it after this. But the point being,
I have that app.
Yeah, there's no doubt that when a brand engages someone on this panel or another for a skill set, that having an audience along with that skill set doesn't usually hurt the cause. There's a value add there. But when you start to have choices of who it is that you get to work with, the quality of the engagement between the two brands, between my brand and their brand, needs to go up. Because what we were talking about earlier, I asked the question of the panel, and I thought it was a great answer. It's like, I get this squish the puppy thing where, oh yeah, we want to work with you, you're great, because you know how to do X, Y, and Z. And they say, all right, cool, so I'll go in there, and I'm there for 20 minutes, and then they're telling me how to do my shit. And that, to me, is strange, because didn't you call me because I was supposed to help you? And at some point, the value equation finds a comfortable resting spot where everybody is winning. And frankly, I got to shoot the Aspen campaign this year, and it was great because I got to work with a company that I really, really value. I think Aspen is of the best in the world, of the highest caliber. I got to work with great athletes. It was a win. They allowed me to talk about the thing that I was doing while I was doing it, which is a huge win for my audience. And I think that they got a great product because more people knew that we were on the mountain working with Dav and all these great athletes doing cool shit. So it's when you get this beautiful balance that there is an ROI. The ROI is often measurable. Now, is it measurable? And you guys understand, from the print audience, pass along is bullshit. Okay, it's totally random, but we accept it. It has history. Okay?
It's not actually bullshit.
It has, it's valuable. There is something, but you're certainly not accurate. It's a guess at best. Do you guys know what the Nielsen ratings are? Do you know how they come about? 1,000 people make a phone call. That's how people buy television ads. 1,000 people call, and they say, "What are you watching?" I say, and did that count as a watch or not a watch? And yet we're programmed to understand to buy those types of media. So when I'm working with Aspen in this capacity, is there ROI? Are we measuring it? We don't know. We're in a really interesting, exciting time, but there's no question that there's value, whether or not you can Einstein, right? There are important things. Yeah. There are important numbers that you can measure.
Not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted.
That's why you got an athlete on the panel.
Didn't Robert say last night, what's the ROI on your mother?
Yep.
I have a great example of this.
And I stole that from Gary Vaynerchuk, by the way.
I had a photography tour that I ran last year. It was a 2-week tour through the American Southwest. Cost $3,500, not including plane tickets. So it was a serious commitment. When we launched it, we didn't know. We never did this before. Would anyone sign up? Turns out, sold out record time. We had a waiting list. All of those people were on this tour to hang out with me, to take pictures with me, and to travel with me. Not one person signed up for the tour by clicking on a link on my site. If they had only looked at the numbers and the clicks and the links, these people who spent thousands of dollars to spend 2 weeks of their time with me, I would have been credited for nothing. The worst relationships I've had with brands is when it devolves into nothing more than a clicking, counting. They view me as just another, looking at the metrics.
Right.
That's part of it, I'll freely admit. Yeah. But that's not, that 90% of it is not that. I have lots of anecdotal evidence, and I don't know how to prove it, of people saying, I bought this product, you mentioned it, I did this and that. There's no, check mark that gets credited if they, do it a month later.
But that's what's going to separate the brands from that actually are able to take the leap and do this the right way from the ones that want the veneer of looking like they're doing it the right way, but really aren't doing it the right way. Is that they don't need the numerical validation to prove that it's the right thing to do, because they actually understand.
The ones I like working with view me as a traveler and someone who reflects their brand. Yeah. We want to be associated with this kind of guy, not as a blogger who has a publication. Yeah, that's a part of it. And
for me, I'm trying to tell stories about Rackspace, and Rackspace likes those stories being told. Things like Rackspace wants to be seen as a bleeding edge company, an innovative brand, an innovative company, a company that stays on the bleeding edge. We host the BBC, we host Oakley, we host the TED videos, right? We want to be seen that way. So when I interview the guys who started Instagram, for instance, that helps them. I mean, I just was at Salesforce's conference and watched what Mark Benioff does, and he just goes from brand to brand to brand and does what I call advanced brand warfare. He gets brands to transfer a little bit of their coolness to his brand. And by talking to the CEO of Burberry or talking to the CEO of General Electric and have them on stage talking about how they're innovating, well, they're innovating at his conference, which means Salesforce is cool, and this is what we all do.
That's a really good transition to just maybe rapid fire. What brands are...
Jared, sorry, I know you're the moderator. I wanted to throw
you're the moderator.
No. I've got a career to make hundreds later. Okay. But to put a bow on this, I think the measurement and the numbers part is really, really important to everyone here, because historically you've been selling to an audience on a numbers-based game, and trying to evolve out of that is very difficult. And especially in times where there isn't, people can say we have social media tools, I can measure sentiment, all that stuff. It's so new. I think a really glaring example in my own personal experience was I launched a camera for Nikon. It was called the D90, and it was the first camera in the history of the world that shot HD video with a lens that you could add depth of field to. So what was previously a $200,000 camera now was $1,000 to get the same sort of cinematic look. And I talked, after several trips to Tokyo, working with 3 ad agencies on 3 different continents, talked them into letting me make a behind-the-scenes campaign about shooting this campaign, using the actual camera as the video camera. That boggled their mind, but after kicking and fighting and screaming, that particular video was infinitely more powerful than all of their paid media. And 2 days afterwards, I got a call from the president and said, "Che-san, we originally think very dangerous, but now we're grateful you make a big success. but please, make for us big list on what you do to make success." It had been the most successful launch in the history of the camera company. But the interesting part to me that showed the thinking, which is what I'm trying to hold on to and hope that people in the audience aren't doing, is that there is some formula to this shit.
Yeah.
It's not a formula-driven thing. And if I was to write it down, it's like, okay, spend 15 years as a professional photographer. Build yourself a brand that you can stand on and you believe in. Talk to people for free for years and years and years. Work tireless. It's a long list that sounds like the things that you and I do every day, and yet they want a recipe for it, and there is no recipe.
Not only that, but you said something earlier where you try things, and that's what I do every day. I try things. I try different things on my with Facebook, and Twitter and Google Plus or whatever new thing comes along. I'm always trying things, and God knows if any of them will go anywhere. But once in a while, one of them does, and it's like, wow, okay. But can I write that down and say you should you should put pictures on every post? I don't know.
It's not mistake avoidance. It's error recovery that we seek these days.
Good soundbite.
You can write that.
I do want to cover ROI because there is a spreadsheet at Rackspace somewhere that they track what business I cause, and they do watch my numbers, my clout scores and stuff like that, but they don't make a big deal about it. It's just sort of under the cover, and they somebody's watching that. But
does that exist for Tiger Woods?
What's that?
Does that exist for Tiger Woods?
I'm sure it does. I'm sure somebody at Nike has a
how
pretty
much
good
do you
idea
really
of how much business went up when they sponsored him, and when he got in trouble, it went down a little bit. And I'm sure somebody's watching that, but they don't bring it up with Tiger Woods.
Indexes that sort of put just like a cloud score, that are out there for athletes and how much media they get and that type of thing. But I think it is in the same realm of what we're talking about, which is it's a little bit intangible to say exactly what the value is of certainly some of the things that you guys do with your audiences. Who are the brands? What are the brands that are doing it well now?
We talked about this at lunch. You said Converse, which is something I really agree with.
Yeah, I think Converse is doing a really good job. Especially if you look at what they do on their Facebook page, I think they replaced their icon with user-submitted photos. Like every week, a new user basically gets their icon to be Converse's icon. I think Jones Soda does a really good job. I think Proof, the eyewear company, if you guys know that company, I think they're doing a really good job right now.
I look at Zappos. I look at Oakley. I look at GoPro. They're 200 yards. They were 200 yards from my house, so I kept seeing them online. It's like, damn. And then I saw the companies in Half Moon Bay, and I looked them up, and it's literally 200 yards from my house. So I went over and introduced myself to Nick and found out what they were doing. And I hate using GoPro as an example, though, because everybody says, well, that's a product that is... It's not us, We don't have a product that makes cool videos of people jumping off 50-foot cliffs and stuff like that. But then I bring up Red Bull, and I said Red Bull is a product that's sugar water, basically. And it sells $2 billion a year. How do they do that? They hacked your brain. How do they hack your brain? They applied their brand to gods. And by the way, if you work at Red Bull, you're not allowed to wear the Red Bull brand if you're not a god. If you're not one of those chosen people, like some of the skiers and people in this room. There's chosen gods that are allowed to have the Red Bull brand associated with them. And they're hacking all of our brains by doing that. Because now, when I drink a Red Bull tonight, I'm going to be a little bit more godlike.
What threads, maybe even the audience, what threads of the brands that we mentioned do you guys notice? Thanks. Have a nice night.
Uncomfortable silence.
Okay, I'll talk to these guys if you guys aren't my friends anymore.
One of the things, I don't know, this is kind of going back to one of the previous points, but I work with a lot of brands and try to help them sort of get over the initial hurdles of trying to build their community. And there's this urge to want to get into the tactical stuff. Let's run a promotion. Let's try to get people to take this action. What we really want is clicks. Yeah. And I think that's totally jumping over what needs to happen first, which is first you've got to actually get a relationship going. You can't ask people to start basically being lab rats and like click the button and win the prize or whatever and expect that that's going to actually be the beginning of a relationship. I think that we've used the word authenticity way too much, but I mean effectively starting the process involves actually being willing to invest in the relationship without expecting some sort of immediate ROI. It doesn't work in a world, you know, that operates sort of quarter by quarter because everybody's held to these standards. But part of the reason that these guys probably were able to get their communities going is because they didn't care about an immediate ROI. They just did it because it was born of passion. But the irony is that now that they have these communities, they can do all kinds of really interesting tactical things and run promotions and engagement sort of oriented activities and get those kinds of more measurable, more tangible, more immediate results.
So it goes back to all of you having a passion first, sharing that content, quality content, and giving without expecting anything in return.
Yeah.
And then being willing to invest in that and have patience with it over a long period of time. I mean, Chase, you said the other night, you know, how did this come to be? Stamina. You know, which
Stamina.
I think certainly Brad can speak to that with, and any of the filmmakers in here can speak to that continuing to build your content and put it out there in the world and be willing to continue to put it out there even when it is hard to do. And
It's the most underrated thing in business, I think. And in building brands, in building personal brands or global brands, is stamina. Can you fall down and stand up over and over? Can you learn as you do those things? And can you be relevant for a long fucking time?
There's actually, Seth Godin wrote a good book that was kind of overlooked called The Dip that really talked about that because there's this.
It's about me.
How did you know?
The Dip?
Oh. But crossing basically that point where you're not seeing the immediate return, that's the point at which most people give up. And you've got to be able to actually push through that and get to that point.
You know, Airbnb, it took 1,000 days for their business to start working. And it's all about stamina. If they had given up on day 995, we would never have known about Airbnb.
I couldn't stay on your couch.
It took 1,000 days for that business to start working. I like looking at the world like the doubling pennies. One of my favorite questions is, would you rather have 100 grand today or a penny that doubles every day for a month? So today's 1 penny, tomorrow's 2 penny, the day after is 4 penny, and so on and so forth. The penny is far more valuable, but you got to stay alive 27 days. Right? That's where the compound interest kicks in and it starts going nuts. And a lot of people forget that it took hard energy to cause a penny to go from 1 penny to 2 penny and go to some weird place that you maybe didn't want to go to that day and write another blog post and another blog post and go to another meeting and do another video chat and click a like on another couple things on Facebook and do a couple more things on Twitter and go and shoot some YouTube video and get up at 4 in the morning to be out in the snow when it's freezing cold and you really would rather be in bed. It takes 1,000 days, 1,000 little things that cause that penny to start doubling to where you're on stage, you know, and people are asking
I
you
followed
questions.
Robert for a couple of years. I know he loves what he does. I know it because he's been doing it for years, and he takes the time to go to all these companies. When I made the decision to take my blog seriously, I just knew if I don't quit, I will win. Because I will out-travel people. I have stayed in the biggest flea-bitten shitholes everywhere in the world. I've been away from my friends and family for years. I live out of a bag. I didn't make any money on my website for all practical purposes for 5 years. Purposefully. And because I see too many people doing dumb stuff to make a buck. And I knew just hold out, stick to be a premium brand, and it'll work. And that is reflected in the people who follow you. You can't fake it. And they know this guy's been doing this for 5 years. He is committed. He believes in it. And there's no doubt about the authenticity in their mind.
Which I think in this room in particular, I mean, that we all share that. You know, share that. I mean, it's been beat to death today as far as credibility and the passion with which we build the content. So I think that you know, it applies outside of the snow sports world as well on a larger level sometimes. How do brands engage with you? If I'm right.
Talk to me.
You know, how can you know, if I have a product or I have a message, you are like the athletes in our world. You are like the athletes of tech and travel and creativity and photography. You know, how do you engage with brands on a business level?
Well, I repurpose that a little bit. How do I choose my path through life? How do I choose who I'm going to, and Chase talks about it a lot. How do I choose the next client? How do I fire a client who's not conducive to a great life, And how do I choose who I'm going to do the next video with and spend an hour with? And that has, it's a pattern in my head. I'm writing a book on context, on the future, and I'm interviewing people who build GoPro cameras, to Google Glasses, and I'm choosing to go down that path. And if you don't fit on that path, it's easier to say
so
no.
if I'm a brand and I approach Robert Scoble and I say, you've got millions and millions of people in your audience,
First of all,
can
that
I
bores
hire
me.
you? Then you're just like, no, basically.
No.
So that you're basically
I have a contract with Rackspace that keeps me from working for anybody
So you
else.
have one sponsor.
Yeah. Now, if you really do want to hire me in your Toyota and you want to throw a lot of money at me, then let's go.
For example,
let's go drinking.
Don't kill puppies.
Yeah, you don't kill puppies. Let's go drinking. But most of the time, I'd rather have somebody come to me and go, hey, we have something that we think is going to be really cool for people to use. Or like the Siri called me 6 months before Siri launched and said, we have something that we think is important for you to see.
So it's that simple as far as, but
I'm
it
always
just has to be
looking
aligned.
for
Gary,
the next thing.
how about you with the?
It depends. Sponsorship is pretty much my business model, but it has to be a company that I like or a product I like, because otherwise it's just not going to work. And I've had a good example. A couple of years ago, Coca-Cola had this product where they were going to send 3 people around the world to every country that sold Coke, 206 countries. And they sent me an application like, we're looking for people who travel a lot and with a big social media profile. I'm like, that's me. Well, they ended up hiring 3 20-something kids who were good-looking, who were actors. Project flopped, unless you include one of the biggest companies in the world getting 200 views per YouTube video, a success, which I don't think I would. They came to me and was like, hey, it'd be great if you could promote our thing. It's like, it would be great. I'm not, but when the biggest advertiser in the world comes to me and says, give us free advertising, my reaction is, go screw yourself. I'm not going to do that. But then there are other companies that I work with, great. Sometimes it's on a per project basis. So Monday, I'm flying to Bangkok via Singapore Air. Haven't flown on Singapore Air in 13 years, and I mentioned that to just offhand to a PR rep, and they're like, well, we got to get you to of flying me on a A380 and
in
I
first
want
class.
that gig.
business.
Yeah. Business class? So you don't get to the shower in the front? I've never had the shower in the front, but I keep hearing this from rich people, that when you're in first class on Singapore Airline in the Airbus, that there's a shower when you're getting ready to land.
Maybe I'll get an upgrade. I don't know. If I do, the photos will be on Twitter.
Beautiful.
Guaranteed.
But I mean,
By the way,
to some degree, you're using you have such an intuitive understanding of your personal narrative and what you're about, that presents a very clear framework for what makes sense to do and what doesn't make sense.
I look at it as a path, and if you fit, I'm going there, and if you fit there, talk to me, please. I want to know where the future of the world is. That's what I've signaled for 20 years to the world. You talked about, never mind.
Chase.
Is the brand question?
Yeah, how does a brand, you've worked with lots of brands, Nikon and Apple.
I have a little bit easier than some, I think Robert has his own unique challenges. I think Gary has his own unique challenge where I get off a little easier than these guys is that I can take a picture of anything. But deciding what it is that I want to take a picture of is how I can sort of self-select, curate a little bit. And then so inbound interest is usually how it starts. And I think
you should correct yourself. You can make an interesting photo of anything. I can take a photo of anything.
But that's a different part of your business. We're talking about your audience to a degree.
Sure.
If a brand comes in and says, I want to put banners on, your website.
There's absolutely nothing.
Gary has some banners, right?
But I don't sell banner advertising per se. If I have a sponsor and I prefer to do sponsorships that are at a much larger level, I'll just sort of throw in the banner ads for free. That's just sort of something I just do to help establish the association of the brand with myself.
Right.
I actually, my defense is for the people that I have a relationship with, for my community. What I am not doing if a brand approaches me, I'm not on behalf of the brand going into the people that pay attention to what I do. And that's a fundamental difference in what I think.
It's editorial.
Yeah. Well, I just know where my allegiance is. And it's not to say I don't have great relationships with some amazing brands, but it's just that it's very carefully selected because I want to know what they want from me and the thing. And I don't want to make it sound like it's too hard to get into. I'm not trying to be some crazy boutique, but there's generally, I can take a picture for them. I do endorse companies occasionally. I've endorsed Polaroid with Lady Gaga and Nikon with Ashton Kutcher. And there's individual one-off projects, which like these guys have talked about too. But that's where I have a little bit easier. But each of those things has their own set of sort of subcategories. If you're going to take a picture, do I like the thing that you're going to take a picture of?
Right.
I like Aspen. That's one of the reasons that I was, they asked if I would be interested. I said, oh my God, this is a great brand. So then we're a good match. And I also think that the audiences are complementary. And then an endorsement, you're on the inside of the business. We'd say no to 9 out of every 10 inquiries, I would say, at least.
Right, and that's part of, since you all have this massive audience and hundreds of thousands of Twitter followers and Facebook fans and millions of people collectively, but you don't sell tweets. You don't sell that exposure, which I think is, some celebrities, that is a business, but for you guys, as a clarity, that's not part of your business.
Anytime you can afford to have a long-term view for your audience, for yourself, for your brand, take that long view, because it almost always is better. I can't think of a short-term quickie that's better than having a long-term relationship. I just can't.
I think part of that though is too that our perception may be that that we've hit some sort of maturation point in Twitter or Facebook or whatever, but. I think we all agree, like we're really just at the very, very tip of the iceberg of where all this stuff is going. And so if you care about the long-term success of your brand, then look at it from that perspective. Really it's the penny thing. Where you're at now is basically like 3 turns of the penny.
Mm-hmm. So we've been talking for over an hour now. Why don't we open it up to questions from the audience? Start with Riley.
I'll take that.
It's a great question.
I worked at Microsoft for 3 years, and in a period where there was a lot of people throwing a lot of what I call Molotov cocktails through our front window, trying to get attention, trying to just be heard because their software wasn't working, their thing wasn't working, their driver wasn't working, their whatever it was that they were arguing about, and a lot of times just saying, hey, I'm here and I'm hearing you, calms them way down. They stop throwing Molotov cocktails all of a sudden, start talking, and that's just basic customer service. And this is a very powerful medium because I can talk to thousands of people and hear them all in live chat time. In a half an hour, I'm going to be on the Gilmore game. We have people chatting in the live chat room while we're talking. And
so how do you deal with the haters, right? That's
part of it is you get a little thick-skinned about it. The problem with my psychology is one of my things is I love to be loved, and so it drives me nuts. But it drives me nuts to have negative attention toward me. I remember negative attention far more than 10 positive comments. And I get lots of positive comments, and I appreciate that. But I've learned in the last 10 years to balance it out. I had a hater who was just causing me mental anguish, and then I went to the Library of Congress and did an interview, and the lady who designed the photo indexing system at the Library of Congress said, I love what you do. And what she said is more important than this guy. But in my mind, it's fucking with my mind. So it's important to balance, what people are saying to you and keep it keep a
And from
thicker
a
skin
brand
a little bit.
perspective, though, do you engage those people? Do you
Absolutely.
talk to them and say,
Absolutely.
"Hey, I'm sorry you're upset," or do you delete them, or do you ignore them, or
No,
never delete them?
Never, because they're throwing Molotov cocktails through your front window for a reason. And if you try to delete them and try to that causes
speaks
revolutions.
to the idea
to
of
happen.
trying to control in this new framework of how it to go back to how terribly named this panel was, in terms of community versus audience, where it's a two-way street, and that really the idea of trying to control that is going to be a failing notion for brands, for media entities, for you guys as individuals.
If somebody says United Airlines, they're so good, does the brand learn anything from that? Not really. If somebody says, your gate agent at this gate really was rude and angry, the brand has a learning opportunity there and can learn and improve. And that's how we look at it. If we're getting somebody saying, Rackspace sucks or Robert Scoble sucks, I try to learn from it. I try to do something with that. And I certainly say thank you for the feedback, and I'm listening. I'm here. Call me. I'll work through it, and I'll try to take care of you. Because otherwise they just start throwing more Molotov cocktails through your front window.
Yeah, care, essentially.
Yeah, no, I want to address it from sort of two perspectives. And one is, what does the brand do? And the second thing is, what does the community do?
Yeah.
So if you've actually taken the time to invest in building the community, you'll see that the people who are your advocates will speak on your behalf.
That is true.
And that's huge. Because all of a sudden now you're getting third-party validation.
Chase, can you speak to that just for a second? Because I've seen that in your community.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I share with Robert when you get negative feedback, there's two things. One, I think listening to it's really important, super important. It keeps your ego in check, and it reminds you that if, let's just say there's a 1% asshole quotient, we all know it's a lot higher than that. And if there's 1 million people that pay attention to what you want to do, then there's 10,000 people that want to kill you every day. And if you decide to focus on that 1%, you're going to struggle. If you decide to try and to understand from it, to change your behavior, to listen to it, you can't possibly maybe engage all of them, but it really is an opportunity to have a conversation with some of them. And if you've built a community through an organic method where there is a relationship and it spans time, 9 times out of 10, I don't have to say anything, because 10,000 pitchfork-carrying members attack the person who is attacking me.
But it's also not right and wrong either.
No.
That's the thing. Like if you have a conversation, say you and I have a political conversation, I'm entitled to my opinion, you're entitled to yours. Everybody in the community.
And everybody has a bad day. I wrote a whole blog about how Apple's customer service really screwed me over one time. Apple, best company in the world, had a bad day and had bad process. And I blogged about it, and it's getting fixed. But, every brand has a bad day, and you need to learn to deal with crisis and some things go wrong.
You got to deal with criticism. Who here doesn't ever want to hear any criticism or any feedback?
Well, if you're not getting criticized, then you're probably not pushing it hard enough.
Well, yeah, there's a great Mario Andretti quote: "If you're not crashing every once in a while, you're not driving fast enough." So, there's something to be learned in there. But feedback is awesome, especially if you want to have a real relationship with a real audience. If you want to have my following has often in these business situations been compared to celebrities I mentioned earlier, to Gaga and around the Polaroid stuff that I've done, and to Ashton Kutcher. And what we have been told, I don't have the means to pay for these fancy measuring tools, just that there's a much higher engagement on photography stuff for my smaller audience than Lady Gaga is one of the most famous people in the world. But that is because there is a lot of hollow followers right here. If Gaga says buy something, what percent of that, of that population is going to actually do anything? That's because I think she has a less authentic conversation by just being a superstar than any of the people up on this couch, because we actually care. Gary actually has soup. That's virtual. You actually have dinner with people in the places that you go. With I think that's one of the reasons that it's a cool platform.
That's a great question, Riley.
Yeah, thank you, Riley. That was really, really good, man.
So I can sort of consider you guys all journalists who have sort of branded your own form of journalism without editors,
Yep.
which is pretty awesome. But
Very awesome, actually.
yeah. So I was just wondering, how do you think there's a conflict between constant content generation and quality. Because at a certain point, you're your own editor, and especially on Facebook, when I mean we all have like one friend who somehow always is updating and somehow is always on your feed, and you're just trying to get rid of them because you don't care. But I'm sure at what point it's too much.
I was listening to the guy from Red Bull saying do fewer things better. And I was like, that hurt. That hurt. But
you tell people, like, if you don't want to, get
no,
to the barrage,
but I try. It's something I'm thinking about. Like, how do I get a better interview, or how do I shut up and not interrupt people? And how do I'm taking some of that criticism's coming on YouTube, and I'm internalizing it. And I'm like, okay, how do I get to the next level? How do I step up my game? How do I get Mark Andreessen in a seat? And I'm working through that process, and that's not easy. And so that comment is in my mind, like, how do I do fewer things better?
It's true, and one of the problems I have is I'm traveling so much. In the last month, I've been in northern Canada shooting polar bears with a camera.
For Toyota.
Running around Spain, did a quick trip into Africa, came here, and so all of October I'm taking off. I'm just going to go to Bangkok and work. Now, to the rest of the world, that sounds like I'm traveling, because I'm actually going to circumnavigate the globe in the process, but I'm just taking a month off, and that's been the biggest problem I've had, is I don't get to write enough. It took me 6 months to edit the photos I took from Antarctica, because I was doing shit all the time in between then. And finding time in the day to do that when you don't have an office, you don't have a set routine, I don't have a desk or a chair to sit in sometimes, is very hard for me.
By the way, that's why I'm writing a book, is on this theme. It's like a book forces me to do thousands of conversations and bundle it together. And that's a bigger project, and it is forcing me to think differently than I started a year ago.
Doing video when I began traveling. And what I found is, by myself, being the editor, being the cameraman, being in front of it, doing all that myself, and 5 years ago, there weren't any solid-state cameras, so I had to use tape, which was a pain in the ass. And I eventually just said, forget it. I'm just going to do still photos and focus on that. I would love to do video. I think most travel videos suck. I think there's a huge opportunity to kind of liven it up, but I just don't have the resources by myself to do it.
Was your question about from like an individual perspective, or are you asking from the position of maybe how a brand thinks about that same thing? So are you asking us individually, or is it?
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's all you can really respond to. Like how do you edit yourself, and how do you know what is it just experience that you just got to learn, or like?
I mean, when you say it's feeding the beast, it literally is a beast. Facebook, I have a Facebook feed of 1,200 startups. And if you don't show up there once in a while, you start getting forgotten, And then GoPro was just there with a picture. But GoPro's quality is so high that, every time I see a picture or a video from GoPro, it's just at the highest level, right? And so you have to, it's a balancing thing. You do have to feed this beast, but you have to also keep the quality high so people think, man, I want to see the next GoPro picture, or the next, Ford picture, or the next Chase Jarvis video.
It's a balance between, I think, a regular drumbeat and things that are interesting or important to you, because that's, I said earlier in the panel, talked about whether you're an individual or a brand, like being human. That's one of the reasons brands hire humans to represent them, like the Michael Jordans and the whatevers, because it puts a human face on a brand. So the more human you can be in your correspondence with your community, I think the better off you are. Now, if you take, my grandma didn't understand Twitter. Bless her, she's 86. So I explained it to her, and it's like, okay, she's like, well, I'm going to the bathroom now. And, that's not an interesting tweet. And if you take one, if you take, it's like that's a Dave's Twitter feed, right? No, if just kidding, buddy. I subscribe. Yeah, I've been unfollowed. It's okay. But one tweet out of context, you're right, is not very informational or helpful. But as soon as you read a Twitter feed that's been going on for a year, you certainly understand that you get a sort of 360-degree picture of somebody, or at least a 270. You understand a little bit more. So there has to be some sort of regularity, and that's where I see brands trip and fall. They don't have a sort of a consistent voice, for example. And I understand how hard that is when you've got 20 people up in your social media biz, probably like at Toyota, right? You have a whole team. So a regular drumbeat, as human as possible, I think, is a prescription.
More questions?
I think they just want it over.
All right.
Thanks.
Thanks very much. Panel, esteemed panel, audience, the meeting.